Mrs. Scott, you say that you decided to give this letter to Logan Swift, despite the fact that his wife asked you for it first?
Yes, that was my decision.
Why did you favor one parent over the other?
Because I believed that Logan Swift would make a better parent for the little boy, and I felt that the truth about the letter should come out, considering its contents.
Are you absolutely sure about the contents of this letter? Are you sure that it wasn't merely permission for you to keep that baby for only a brief period of time?
No, the letter stated that we were to raise him as our very own son.
Mrs. Scott, how well do you know Logan Swift?
Well, he's a very good friend. He is my husband's best friend.
You say was because until recently you thought that your husband was dead, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
In fact, for the last 6 months, you've been living the life of a widow.
Objection, Your Honor. This testimony
I promise connection, Your Honor.
Very well, you may proceed.
Mrs. Scott, isn't it true that during the 6 months that you thought your husband was dead and buried, that you and Logan Swift drew closer together? That you became more than just friends? That in fact you actually fell in love? That you were lovers?
Objection, Your Honor. This is only an attempt to embarrass and disconcert this witness.
Mr. Rutledge, I still fail to see that you have made a legitimate connection in the case at hand.
Well, Your Honor, I believe the witness is falsifying this evidence out of a personal bias.
Your Honor, we object to these allegations.
Yes, sustained. Now, Mr. Rutledge, if you wish to prove that the witness is perjuring herself for personal or other reasons, you'll have to do more than make assertions. That is not the way to impress this court.
Excuse me, Your Honor, but I believe I have a right to answer that question. I would like to answer it.
Well, very well, Mrs. Scott.
It isn't true. It just is not true.
You're not in love with Logan Swift?
The only reason I am in this courtroom is because I know the truth, and I think everyone else should know it too.
Now, Mrs. Scott, the night that Mrs. Swift left for London, before she boarded the plane, when she came to your home, you said that the baby, Jameson Swift, was already in your home. Is that right?
Yes, I had been taking care of him for the past couple of days.
You're very fond of that little baby, weren't you?
Yes, very fond.
Did you have any children of your own then?
No.
As a matter of fact, your doctor had just told you that you probably never could have children, didn't he?
Yes, but the doctors were wrong. I have a little girl.
Yes, but at the time, you despaired of ever having a family of your own, and that made you even more attached to little Jamie, didn't it?
I suppose so.
Did you want to keep him?
Yes, of course I did.
Yes, you did. In fact, Mrs. Scott, you wanted that very much, didn't you?
Why shouldn't I?
Mrs. Scott, isn't this the real truth? That you wanted a child of your own so badly that you indulged in a little wishful thinking? That you decided completely on your own that Mrs. Swift had given you that child to keep rather than merely ask you to care for it?
No, it was not wishful thinking. Mrs. Swift did give us her son, and she gave us a letter stating that he was ours.
Ah, yes, the alleged letter.
Look, the letter may not exist now, but I remember what it said.
Do you? Word for word?
Well, not exactly. It was a long time ago.
Well, tell us what you think it said.
I, Raven Swift, do hereby give April and Draper Scott the right to raise my son, Jameson Swift, as their very own. It was something like that.
Sounds very much like a legal document. Tell me, was Mrs. Swift an attorney?
You know she is not, but her husband is.
Yes, and your husband is too, isn't he?
Yes.
Tell me, Mrs. Scott, isn't it just possible that you're imagining this letter the way you wanted it to sound?
No. That is what the letter said, despite the fact that I don't remember the exact words.
Weren't the exact words more like, I, Raven Swift, do hereby give permission to my friends, Mr. and Mrs. Draper Scott, to care for my baby until my return from abroad.
No.
Objection, Your Honor. The counsel is putting words in the witness's mouth.
I'm going to overrule.
If Raven had not thrown that letter off my terrace, it would be here right now as proof.
You insist that Mrs. Swift deliberately destroyed this document.
She threw it away. That's the same thing.
Tell me, did she have it in her hand at the time?
Yes.
Well, then why didn't she simply tear it up? I mean, if she wanted it destroyed, wouldn't that have been the best way? Tear it up, burn it?
No, she wanted it to look like an accident. She said that the wind blew it out of her hand.
That is a lie. I never said that.
Mrs. Swift, we will have no more of these
I'm
outbursts.
sorry, but that woman is lying.
If you won't remain silent, I'll have you removed from this courtroom. Now, you may go ahead, Mr. Rutledge.
Tell me, Mrs. Scott, was there anybody else who witnessed this extraordinary event? Anyone else who saw Mrs. Swift presumably throw the letter from the terrace?
Yes, her husband, Mr. Swift, was there.
Oh, well, her husband, yes, and he'll gladly corroborate your story, won't he?
Look, I swear to you that the letter did exist, and if you don't believe me, you can ask my own husband.
But you just told us that your husband and Mr. Swift were best friends.
That doesn't mean he would lie for Mr. Swift.
Well, then why hasn't your attorney called him as a witness, too?
Objection, Your Honor. We don't need instructions from the opposing counsel as to how to conduct our case.
Yes, I'll sustain that objection.
Thank you.
Mrs. Scott, after Mrs. Swift left for England, after leaving the baby in your care, did your husband give the baby to Mr. Swift?
Logan is Jamie's father. He had every right to him.
Ah, but he wasn't the legal parent at the time,
He
was
is Jamie's father. How much more legal can you get?
Was it your idea to give the baby to him?
No,
Was it your husband's idea?
I suppose it was. Look, when Mr. Swift realized that his wife had no intentions of returning to Monticello and that she had given us Jamie permanently, he was rather justifiably upset.
So you just handed the baby over to him?
I told you he was entitled to
I didn't ask you that. I want to know if you voluntarily agreed to give the baby to Logan Swift. Or maybe it was done against your wishes.
I didn't necessarily agree with it at the time.
Why not?
Very selfish reasons, Mr. Rutledge. I wanted to keep him.
Wasn't it because you knew it was wrong? Because you had faithfully promised to keep that baby only until Mrs. Swift returned?
No.
Wasn't it because you realized you had broken a solemn vow? That you had betrayed a woman who thought you were her friend?
Oh, this is ridiculous. Raven Swift doesn't have any friends.
That's right. Right now, Raven Swift doesn't seem to have any friends. Not in this courtroom, anyway. Just as she no longer has any family. No more questions, Your Honor.
Very well. You may return to your seat, Mrs. Scott. Mr. Nelson, if you wish to call another witness. Mr. Nelson.
Oh, yes, Your Honor.
Do you wish to call another witness?
Yes, of course, Your Honor. Your Honor, we'd like to call Detective Deborah Saxon to the stand.
Detective Deborah Saxon, please take the stand. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name.
Deborah Saxon.
Be seated, please.